G'day everyone, this is Bede and Rob, aka the Terrible Aussie, and welcome back to the latest episode of The King Zone, the podcast where my co-host and I talk about the film and TV adaptations of horror author Stephen King. Unfortunately, my regular co-host Super Marcey won't be here on the podcast today due to health reasons, but we do wish Marcy the best and that she has a speedy recovery and that she'll be back on the show very soon. However, though, I am joined by a very special guest who will fill in as my co-host for this episode, and he is a man who has been on many episodes of The King Zone before, and previously he was on the episode where we talked about the miniseries The Outsider, and we welcome back from Film School Rejects, Mr. Rob Hunter. G'day, Rob. How's it going?
Hello, it's going well. And if it makes you feel better, you can call me Super Marcey during this recording.
I think I might have to do that, and you might have to put on your best Australian accent, if that's even possible.
Well, that doesn't bode well then.
Pretty much just the only thing you need to do is just basically do the impression of the guy from that episode of The Simpsons where they're in Australia and the guy goes, "You call that a knife? This is a knife."
I'll practice and get back to you on that.
But how have you been going, Rob?
Oh, well, I mean, I think you know the answer. Expected, holed up at home for the most part, watching the mayhem unfold. I unfortunately am in the U.S. during this apocalypse. I love the country, great country, but man, this country is not prepared for anything. So it's been a ride.
Yeah, and I completely understand. And I mean, even though here in Australia we kind of have it a bit more easier than what you guys are going through over in the US, but I definitely feel for all of you because, like, especially in the past few weeks when, again, with COVID still skyrocketing over in the US, and of course you have Trump, who, thank goodness, who's been voted out as president. Unfortunately, he's still president for the next 2 months and is basically gone complete psychotic over the last few weeks since his loss.
I figured he would spend the next 2 months, just breaking as many things as he can, smearing shit all over the White House walls, tearing up treaties, causing as much damage as possible. He's going above and beyond, though. I didn't realize he'd be pulling military out of pretty much everywhere around the world, or trying to. Which is just dangerous at this point. So hopefully they kind of press pause on that until he gets his ass booted out, and then people can try and right all the wrongs, all the many wrongs that he's instituted.
Indeed, I hope so too for your guys' sakes, but for everybody else's as well, and that at least we can get back to some kind of normalcy in the future, even though I know it'll be a bit of a long process before we even get there.
Yep, most definitely.
Yeah. But with Trump going practically insane in the White House, that reminds me of one of the films we're going to be talking about today on this episode of The King Zone. A nice little segue there. For this episode, we're going to be talking about both the film and TV adaptations of Stephen King's, probably one of his best-known novels, The Shining, and we'll also be talking about the sequel, Dr. Sleep. We'll definitely have a lot to discuss with these two films and miniseries. So especially with the first one we're going to be talking about, because there's definitely a lot to talk about with that one. So we'll get right to it. So first up, we will be talking about the 1980 film adaptation of The Shining.
Better run. Better run. Better run. Better run.
The Torrances are going to take care of the Overlook for us this winter.
Better run. Better run.
I'm outlining a new writing project. 5 months of peace is just what I want.
Are you scared of this place?
No.
What about room 237?
It's typical of you to create a problem like this when I am really into my work. slow tonight, isn't it?
Which, of course, was directed by the legendary Stanley Kubrick, which he co-wrote with Diane Johnson, which is, of course, based on the novel of the same name by Stephen King. And it stars Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, Scatman Carruthers, and Danny Lloyd. And the plot summary for this one, which I'm reading off IMDb, is a family heads to an isolated hotel for the winter where a sinister presence influences the father into violence, while his psychic son sees horrific forebodings from both the past and future. Now, where to start with Stanley Kubrick's The Shining? I'll go first. I guess to start off with where I saw the film for the first time, I think I didn't really see the film until for the first time I watched it at least until I was about in my late teens or early 20s, because I was a bit of a late bloomer when it came to horror, because I didn't get into it till about my teenage years. But even before I even saw The Shining, I was very much aware of it, particularly because I think up to that point, I probably had seen so many sort of films and TV shows that parodied The Shining. So I was pretty much aware of it. So when I actually sat down to watch it for the first time, I knew what to expect. At the same time, I wasn't sure because, I only had seen a few Kubrick films at that point, so I wasn't sort of fully aware of what he was like as a filmmaker. But I got to say, the first time I watched it, I really liked it. But as the more times I've seen it since then, over the past 20 odd years, my love for it just grows and grows and grows. I haven't read the original book that the film is based on, but I do know for a fact that it is very different from the book, to say the least, and we'll get to that. But for me, I think it's a really great and fascinating horror film that, while it is pretty simple on the surface in terms of its plot, there's definitely a lot more going on underneath it that does make it very interesting. And there's just so many sort of iconic scenes and moments that, 40 years after it was released, it still leaves an impact on cinema. And for me, when you got a film that is able to do that, you definitely know you're onto something special. And of course, being that it's made by Stanley Kubrick, it just makes that even more special. And he's created something that, for a lot of people is up there as one of the greatest horror films at the time, which is kind of funny because at the time, the film was definitely, even though it did very well at the box office, it had a very mixed response from audiences and critics. But as the decades have gone on and more people have seen it, countless times, the appreciation of it has just grown. And I mean, you can look at any list of the best horror films of all time. You'll definitely find The Shining either in the top 10, top 5, and even in some cases as number 1. I know it's in my personal top 10 horror films of all time, but there's definitely so much about this film I think is just fantastic. But it is a fascinating film as well. But that's the thing. When you have Stanley Kubrick at the helm of it, you definitely know you're going to get something that's just more than just a simple haunted house tale. And Rob, tell us your thoughts on the Shining.
Well, this is embarrassing, but I thought we were here to talk about the Langoliers.
Oh, damn it. That's another podcast coming up very soon.
Well, I mean, I saw it as a teen, and I've seen it a few times since. I feel like Kubrick's The Shining, for me, is a film that I look at through two different lenses. As a straight horror film, I think it's quite good. I think it creates an icy atmosphere. It finds tension. There's, definitely some memorable scenes and imagery in there. And I think it builds to an intense conclusion. It works very well to create atmosphere, sense of foreboding, and just the terror of the entire situation, being trapped in this large haunted place, with someone who is going mad. So I think it works as a horror film. The second lens I look through it though is as a adaptation of King's novel, and this isn't news to anyone, but there I think it definitely stumbles. It gets a lot of things wrong and stuff that it changes because it tries to go for the same conclusion without doing the work that King's novel does. And so again, like I mentioned about it being like an icy film, and this is a Kubrick thing in particular, but here again, it works as a straight horror film, being kind of a cold experience, but you don't have any of the emotion. It's like it's an emotion-free movie, and that's not a bad thing necessarily. I mean, obviously you can make horror movies without emotion, but you don't have the feeling of actually bonding with any of these characters that are there that are in fear. So you don't really fear for them necessarily. You don't care for them necessarily. You're caught up in the drama, again, and in the intensity, but you don't have the warmth that because ideally, and King's book does a good job of this. And this is what Kubrick's film misses for me, is it doesn't create the initial relationship with these characters. And part of it is the casting of Nicholson. I mean, I'm sure again that's not news, because he is, and between his work and between the way Kubrick creates the movie, he's a character who's already mad before we even reach the hotel. And in King's book, he's an alcoholic who has issues, but he loves his son. It's clear he loves his son. And so when he starts being affected by the hotel, by the haunting, by the ghosts, and then that kind of infects his madness, and it grows from there. There's a sadness to it because he is being separated from it, and then by the time you reach the end of the book, this is a character who is divided, is fighting himself basically, and so there's drama there, there's trauma there. It works to create like an emotional